Hello, I'm John Brink, and we are podcasting on the Brink from downtown Prince George, British Columbia. And for our guests from around the world, is central. It's in Canada for one, and it's a beautiful province. It's a big province, and we are in the center of the province of British Columbia, about 750 kilometers, 500 miles north of Vancouver, and then 500 miles towards the Yukon, next to Alaska. It's a big, big province. Today we have a special guest. Her name is Olivia Silvana. Did I say that correct, Olivia?
Yes, you did. Good job.
Yeah, thank you. And Silvana is with us on a virtual podcast from Florida. Can you tell us where exactly you are in Florida?
Yeah, so I'm in Palm Beach County, which is like 2 hours north of Miami,
Okay.
South Florida.
And it's a beautiful day. We just talked about it before the podcast started. The temperature is about the same as it is by us, around 95 to 100 degrees, or but we say about 32 Celsius, guys, is it, that we have? So it's about the same. It's kind of smoky here in the whole region. British Columbia has a lot of forest, a huge amount of forest actually, and there are major forest fires this year in particular. And I've been here for about 60 years, and this is probably the most serious forest fires. I believe we have well over 200 forest fires, and quite a number of them are out of control. Most of them because of lightning or weather related. And then the other part that always plays a role is the global warming. So this is fairly early in the summer still for us. So we are looking at a very serious situation this summer where there are some evacuations of some of the smaller communities that are in danger. So it's a difficult time for British Columbia. So today in particular, we want to, with Olivia as a guest. She's extremely interesting because both Olivia and myself are ADHD and were diagnosed or discovered fairly late that we were. Just to give the intro on myself, I'm 82 and 3/4, nearly 83, and was born in Holland and came to Canada in mid-1965, and didn't know really until I was 57 years old, and walked into a bookstore here in Prince George, and I opened a book and I looked at a book. I don't know why I was in the bookstore for one, but I was looking at this book, and the book's title was Driven to Distraction. I opened the book and there it said ADHD. I had absolutely no idea as to what it was. And the more I read about it, as I was standing there in the bookstore, I said, oh my God, that's me. And I wrote in the book in Dutch, not in English, in Dutch, now I finally know who I am. Why did I write it in Dutch? Because I was ashamed of it, because I looked at it as a potentially, and from the things that I was reading, a mental disease of some sort, and so I was very conscientious of it. That to me, for me, at 57, it took me another 5 years before I went to my doc. That was a personal friend of ours, of my family, my wife, myself, delivered our two daughters, in fact, and was a personal friend of mine until one day, and a friend of mine. And one day I walked into his office 5 days after, when I was 62 then, and he said, why are you here, John? And I said, I think I got ADHD. And so we spent time on it, and he said, I think so too. Now, between my age of 57, I looked at Google and did all the research, was extremely conscientious of it because it was not widely well talked about, obviously. There was a stigma around it, and I found out more and more and more. And the more I was convinced after reading about it that it would be me, then diagnosed when I was 62. And the delicacy of it was then that I'm an entrepreneur. I was building companies, already had a lumber company and a couple of other companies, and I became very conscientious of it because as I go to our lenders, our financial partners, and looking for hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars to build or expand, then I would say blah, 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 and this is the story, this is what I want to do, but I have a mental issue called ADHD, and they would say, well, have a nice day. You know, and so there was a stigma attached to it, and it took a long time, probably about 10 years ago, that I became more proactive about it. I call it now a superpower. So that's kind of in a package who I am, and I've written a book about it. You maybe are familiar with it, ADHD Unlocked, been quite popular a couple of years ago internationally. It's also on audio and all the major platforms, and you know, and so when I speak about it quite a bit, and I'm very proactive on it. So that's kind of a bit of the background on myself, Sylvia.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's so interesting to hear other people's stories and like what age they were diagnosed. And I'm sure for you, the stigma around it at that time was a lot more intense than it is like now.
Right. So what was your experience?
So for me, I was also diagnosed as an adult. And I used to be a school psychologist for like over 10 years. So I primarily worked in the school system with children, teens that had ADHD, autism, other intellectual and learning difficulties, behavioral difficulties, right? So I was around a lot of this. I counseled these children, I did evaluations on them, the whole nine. So I was familiar with ADHD. I knew it existed, I knew what it was, what it looked like. And it got to some point in my career where I was like, I think that I might have this. But I never put like any significant thing towards it. Like I wasn't like, oh, like I need to get diagnosed with this because if I don't, like something detrimental is going to happen to my well-being, right?
Right.
Who knew? Joke around with my friends and be like, yeah, I definitely have ADHD.
Right.
And I would start to like more about it in adults, right? And see how that would come up, especially when it comes to females, because many of us present much differently than males do, especially when we're younger. And so it probably like 2 years after I made that, connection, I reached a clinical burnout in my career to the point where I couldn't function. And like I couldn't get up, I couldn't get out of bed. I didn't know what was wrong with me. And I just felt this like sense of like brokenness. I was like, I'm broken. Something's really wrong with me. Like I went to my doctor and, I was working with a therapist at that time and they were like, well, we think you just have situational depression. So we're going to put you on this antidepressant. And I was like, okay, sure. Like I'm willing to try whatever. But then I end up with this rare side effect within the first week of taking it, and I almost end up in the ER, which I don't know if
Whoa.
you or anyone has heard of this, but it's called serotonin syndrome. And it's like 1% of the population ever experiences it, but it's life-threatening. If you continue to take the medication, it could put you in a coma.
Say that again. What was it that you found it to be?
Serotonin syndrome?
I've never heard of that. Yeah.
Yeah, so
Very rare, right?
very rare. So like I don't want to freak anyone else out, and I always tell people this when I say this story. It's very rare for someone to experience this.
Right.
Um, so then after that, I immediately got off that medication, and I confided in all of my providers, and I was like, look, like I think I have ADHD, and we kind of like discussed everything, and they were like, that could potentially be why you're in this clinical burnout. So that's when I had gotten evaluated, and I think I went through like 2 or 3 different evaluations, and they were like, yeah, you definitely have ADHD. And I think that was the moment where I had this like revelation of, wow, I had this condition my whole life, and I was able to kind of just like put all the puzzle pieces back together, right? Like I was like, this makes sense why this was hard for me. This makes sense why I experienced this. This makes sense why, all these other things kind of didn't pan out for me, or, that I experienced. And it kind of gave me this sense of like relief, but I also went through this period of like sadness. Like, wow, imagine if I knew this sooner. Um, and so I probably got diagnosed about 4 years ago officially.
How long
And
ago?
like 4 years.
Okay.
So ever since then, that's what kind of fueled my passion towards being, an advocate, but also a support, and, you know, leaning into that with more specifically women with ADHD.
Right. So, and your education or background are you are have studied psychology, or you've been always close to the medical field. So when you went to high school, then further education led you in the medical direction. Why?
I always had a very strong passion towards helping other people. And so that's why, like, psychology just always fascinated me. The brain fascinated me, why people do what they do. I always just wanted to, like, know more. So I think that's what first initially fueled my passion towards psychology in general.
And then you studied in that direction. Uh, it sounds to me like you're a very good communicator. Listening to you, have you always been like that, or that you were already from a young age, so in high school and all those other kind of things, that you had confidence, that you had the ability to be a good communicator, and therefore were always very socially involved with your peers and whatever group you were?
It's interesting when you ask that question, because I do feel like I was always, in some aspect, like able to connect with other people, but I don't think that I always had the confidence that I do now. I do feel like I used to be painfully shy to some extent, and I would experience social anxiety, like bouts of it. Um, and so I was a little bit more sometimes like inhibited, versus like how I am now. So it's interesting because I feel like when I think of like younger me, I definitely wasn't the same as I am now. And I think a lot of it has to do with like personal growth and development, and working through a lot of those challenges that created me to have that like lower self-esteem.
Interesting that you say that. That if I kind of take you through my life, I was born in 1940 in Holland, the northeastern part of Holland, and as you know, the Second World War, we were right in the middle of it. That Holland was in the Second World War. My father was drafted into the Dutch Army in April of 1940. My mom had 3 children. I was born in November 1940, so after my dad already was gone. And then my sister was 1 year older, my brother 2 years older. And it was a tough time, a difficult, very difficult time actually, especially in the winter 1944-45, where they called the hunger winter. A lot of kids died, a lot of vulnerable people died, young people or older people, and then it was extremely cold. As kids, we would go with gunny bags onto the railroad yards to pick up anything that was edible and burnable. And we did that every day because we had nothing to eat or to burn unless we found it that same day. And everybody was in the same boat. It was not to help the neighbors, or everybody was into survival. So, then we were liberated by the Canadian Army April the 12th, 1945. That made such an impact on me that I always knew from the time I was 5 years old I would go to Canada, to the land of my heroes. The effect of looking at myself, looking back, of the war were likely, it was not for 5 years until my dad came back. We didn't know for 5 years if he was dead or alive. The last time that somebody saw him was in the bombing of Rotterdam. And then he was underground and fought in the underground for the Dutch freedom, and so it was pretty rough for him, but we didn't know if he was dead or alive. So it was a tough time for my mother. There was a lot of bombing going on, a lot of planes overhead, and we saw far too much that we should not have seen. So it affected me in the sense that, kind of looking at myself as an individual, that I had the inner child. I had diagnosis or consultation for that in my late 50s. Very dramatic, as you well know. And then probably PTSD still affects me through life because of that. And then, and then I was not successful academically. I failed grade 3. Nobody fails grade 3. I did a presentation here about a couple of months ago, and with a group of people. I do a lot of public speaking now. It will become obvious to you as to why. But anyway, it was a big group of people, and I said, I usually use it in my presentations, I failed grade 3. I said, nobody fails grade 3. And a lady way in the back said, I did. I said, okay, just the two of us then. So, but in any event, so that was followed by going to grade 7. I failed grade 7 3 times, and then finally they said, what do we do with this guy? And my parents were beautiful individuals, very, very supportive, but they didn't know exactly either in those days as to, what was going on in a life of a young person. So a lot of people recommended I be sent to a medical or a mental challenging school. Fortunately, they didn't do that, so they got me a job as training as a furniture maker. And then, so that's what I did from the time I was 14. And then finally, I always wanted to go to Canada. And then, and I finally did when I was 24. But I always felt during that earlier period that I was a failure. I was a very outgoing individual, very extrovert, but at the same time, very introverted, and felt that I had failed. And in order for me to, I knew that I could do things as well as everybody else could, but I had to remove myself from Holland and finally go to Canada when I was 24. Started with nothing from the ground up, and then with the dream of building a lumber mill, because my family had been involved in lumber here in British Columbia, and I wanted to start with nothing. So I had a suitcase, a set of clothes, 3 books, and when I came to Vancouver, Canada, and I couldn't speak English, didn't know anybody, didn't have a job. And fortunately, at the immigration department, there was a German fellow, and I told him what I wanted to do. I wanted to build my lumber mill here in Canada. He said, go to Prince George. That's the center of where all the timber is and the opportunities are. So when I came off the bus here, when I was 24 years old, with my suitcase, my 3 books, my set of clothes, and I had in my pocket exactly $25.47. But what I did have is I had attitude, avoid the negative, passion, work ethic, and I was going to succeed here starting with nothing. And I, even to the extent that if I go back to Holland, I would go either back successful or in a box. And that's kind of radical in a way, but that's kind of how I felt about it. So I started with nothing as a cleaner man, lumber pilot, and all the other kind of things. And then became very quickly successful, became a supervisor, superintendent of a lumber mill here, and then started my first company in 1975 when I was about 35 years old. And and everybody said, "Oh my God, you're so successful." Well, I didn't feel that way. I didn't. I felt I still had been a failure. I had difficulty communicating because I was always conscientious of myself. So I communicated well in a group that I knew the people around my mill, but outside of that, not very. It took me till I was 50 years old in 1990 that through coincidence, my ex-sister-in-law dragged me to Toastmasters. Are you familiar with Toastmasters?
No.
No. If you have an opportunity, put it in your Google and you will find it interesting because very popular throughout the world, actually, especially in the United States. There are probably, I would say, 500,000 people that are members of Toastmasters. There are clubs all over the world. In particular in North America, Prince George has around 4 or 5 clubs. What do they specialize in? Is in becoming a better speaker, listener, thinking on your feet, creating confidence in a social setting that where a small group of people, usually have 15, 20 people in a meeting, and where you then in a structured way expose people to interact with each other, telling stories, becoming speakers, evaluating somebody else's stories, becoming good listeners, and then thinking on your feet. And I was a Toastmaster for 10 years and became a designated Toastmaster, which they call a DTM. That is the highest level of Toastmasters. There is probably 400,000 people today as we speak around the world that are members of the clubs. Wow. There are probably 5 million, if not more, that have been exposed to Toastmasters at different levels. About 0.5% to a percentage of them ever go as far as becoming a DTM. I stayed with it for the 10 years. That changed my life. There's no question about that. It gave me confidence to a certain extent, and then it allowed me to become a better interaction, not speaker necessarily, but interaction, and even more importantly, it made me a better listener. Mm. So that's when I was 50, but it took me till I was 57 that I walked into that store and picked up that book. That was another part that changed my life. That was discovering that I was ADHD. And then the more I found out about it, until I was diagnosed, and then becoming more interactive on it, looking at Google and information, it was not until today, as I said earlier, I'm going to be 83 in November. About 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago, in particular 5 years ago, I would think, I became more active not only in public speaking, but also in talking about ADHD. And understanding it better. And the more I was interactive about it and reading all the things that likely you did, is that the frequency of occurrence, I believe, some of the numbers said is around 8%. The frequency of occurrence is high between by males than females, all of those kind of things. And I looked and interacted to it, and obviously I already was fully aware I'm the classic example of ADHD. Since the time that I've been much more active about it, felt responsible to write a book about it, and become more active about it, which I'm doing now as we do now, but even on a daily basis, there virtually, Oliver, is not a day that does go by where I don't encounter somebody that either says, I have it, somebody in my family has it, or in my circle of friends, or in the area that I work. I say now that ADHD, not only my book, but other books that may be out there. I wrote this book especially for the purpose of ADHD. The foreword is written by a friend of mine. Her name is Tracy Lotz. And did you get a copy of my book?
No.
We will send you copies of all my books here after we are done. And just to make sure that Scott got your address. But the foreword for this book was written by Tracy Lotz. Tracy Lotz is a medical doctor and an emergency surgeon, ADHD. And a number of other people have the stories around that the same. I believe now the frequency of occurrence of ADHD much higher. I believe likely similar between males and female, may expose itself differently, but they are similar to up to, and I believe it may be as high as 20% of the population that either have a combination of, other issues that are directly related to ADHD in combination, as you already referred to and you were exposed to during your professional life. So that combination of more awareness about ADHD was the second element that changed my life at a later stage. And as I started writing about it more, since I was 75, and started thinking about writing, I wrote another book that is this one. We'll send you a copy of this one too, Against All Odds. And it's not about hurrah, hurrah, John, how successful is he? But in spite of it all. And I felt that I had to write about it. So that was the first one that I wrote. We'll send you a copy of that. I felt I had an obligation to share it with other people as to between the inner child, the PTSD, then the feeling of failure, anxiety, and all the issues that you related to. I live with that most of my life. The last one that I actually wrote is finding your passion, living the dream. Just came out here in the last couple of days and will be quite successful. The reason that I show you the books is that it's saying, okay, there you see this individual that has clearly ADHD, felt that he was a failure most of his life, was in spite of it very successful. We have a number of companies, probably 10 or 12. 3 or 4 of them are fairly large companies, so we employ close to 400 people. And there you have this fellow that failed grade 3, failed grade 7 3 times, grew up in Holland speaking Dutch, but in Holland, in the northeastern part of Holland, we speak a dialect that if I speak the dialect, nobody else will understand us in Holland. So I grew up speaking dialect, acquiring, still not very good at it, high Dutch. I'm not a very good writer in Dutch, but then I came to Canada, going through all of the things that I did and just explained, and then at 75, I'd always thought I should write, and amazingly, Olivia, I'm a good writer, and always was, but in English, not so much in Dutch. And and so then I started writing the books, and and then at the same time, because of Toastmasters, I became a professional speaker, where now I do that as a professional speaker around wherever the opportunity presents itself. And I'm writing two more books that will come out next June, and the one that comes out next June, Living Young, Dying Old, and another book about the forest industry is coming out next year. So what I'm saying, it's a superpower, but the frequency of occurrence much higher than most people have believed before, I believe. And that, and I find it still, even now still, in our region, in the province, and all where the opportunity presents itself, including podcasting, that there is still a stigma attached to it and a reluctance to say, I'm ADHD. So, and still the conventional schooling system that we have here, and Canada, no different than you likely have in the United States, is that, and what is also in my book, is the whole different system. I was not good at sitting in a classroom listening to things that were of no interest to me. I was in a different world. That's where I live. And I would come out of the school and I had absolutely no idea as what they talked about. And that's to a certain extent and different extent the case with a lot of other people. So part of my book, I developed a relationship with a fellow by the name of Dr. Tom Romer, who is a vice president academics of British Columbia's Institute of Technology. And they have been working on something they call micro certification. Is saying that if you want to build a career, then for people that are affected by slow learning, that's not only ADHD, it could be because of trauma, it could be because of other circumstances, should focus on micro certification, the core of what they want to and have a passion for, that they want to acquire, and then gradually acquire the other skills that you have to complement that career. And and that, I believe, is the direction we are going. And so anyway, so I put a lot of stuff out here on the table for you to think about and comment on it.
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing I wanted to touch on is, with the prevalence between males and females, it's the same, right? But it's just that males historically have been known to be diagnosed 3 times more likely than females. So that's why everyone thought it was like, it only existed in boys for so long. But
Yeah.
now I think the awareness and the understanding around like what ADHD is, and I think people are starting to grasp it a little bit more, is why more people, males too, right? But even more so females, are getting diagnosed now, like later in their life, because they're like, wait, maybe this isn't just like anxiety and depression, or some women are even misdiagnosed with mood disorders like bipolar. Like what you're really dealing with and what the root underlying cause is ADHD, that is creating the anxiety, creating the depression. And I know that that's what specifically happened for me. I remember, and now I'm a little bit of the opposite of you. I did really well in school. And there's this misunderstanding that, well, if you performed well in school, you can't have ADHD, which isn't true, because your
No.
IQ and your performance, like the ADHD challenges, they're not intertwined.
Correct.
So for whatever reason, I learned to cope, and I had a very strict mom. So I think that she kept me like in line.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think because I was such a strict mom, and
Yeah.
I was like, feared like getting anything below like a B. I was kind of forced into like, well, you have to do well.
Yeah.
But I was the girl that, oh, she daydreams a lot. If I was called on, I could be looking at the teacher, had no idea what they were even asking, what they just
Yeah.
said. So it was like, I was definitely the girl that your head in the clouds, right?
Yeah.
And I got to college, I lost because I went away to college, like an hour from. I grew up in New York, and
Right.
I went like an hour away, so I stayed, and I lost all that structure, all that strict rules, and that is when I think everything unraveled for me, but I just didn't know. And I started getting really bad panic attacks because I couldn't keep up with classes. I couldn't keep up with my paperwork. I couldn't keep up with writing, like all the reports that I had to write. And I quickly started to fail. And, my teachers were like, I was on scholarship, partial scholarship. And I, at that point, like couldn't afford to not be there for the scholarship. So, my mom was like, you need to get a tutor or something. Like you can't fail. Like you can't get below a certain GPA when you have a scholarship. And
Right.
yeah, that was like the moment where everything clicked. And full transparency, I had a friend that had ADHD that had an Adderall script. And she was like, take this. And, I know you're not supposed to do that, but that was the first time I ever tried Adderall. And I was able to focus. I was able to study. And then I paired myself with this one friend that was like super organized and had really good study skills. And my grades went right back up. And I still didn't know, though, anything about ADHD or any of that stuff. And it wasn't long before like the panic attacks just kind of continued because I think I was trying to keep up at a pace that just wasn't realistic for the way that I functioned. And that's when I first went on anti-anxiety meds. My doctors were like, well, you're having these panic attacks, you can't have them because they were really debilitating. I don't know if you've ever experienced them, but they're pretty intense. And ever since I've been diagnosed with my ADHD and have had it treated properly, um, I haven't had any anxiety attacks, like at all, and it's interesting.
Are you still using, you were on Adderall.
Hmm.
Are you still using medication now, if I may ask that? Or
Yeah, I'm on it now. I wasn't technically on it in the past until I got diagnosed, and then
Right.
when I got diagnosed, it was like a very slow process of figuring out if I liked it, how I felt on it, what worked for me.
Right.
I am someone who's fortunate enough to have very minimal side effects. I know not
Right.
everyone experiences this,
Right.
so I to experience the benefits more than the side effects, if that makes sense.
Right. So with me, so now talking about my doc again, that the family doctor, and 2008, I went into his office, and the reason that I know when it was, it will become clear in a minute here. And I said, okay, so, and I don't go there very often. I know him as a friend, but I then went down and I said, I've been, kind of following, obviously, Google and blah blah blah, and other people, and saying, well, you think that I should be on medication? And he said, I don't know, and he said, let me check it out. And then he suggested maybe Adderall. And so I said, okay, I'll try that. And, not that I thought it, for some reason or another it may change something or whatever. I had no particular problem. But anyway, so he did a prescription for Adderall, 100 tablets. I think it was 20 or something. It's fairly strong, I think. And, so when I used 3 pills, but it didn't do nothing for me. So I stopped using them. And then when I started writing the book, actually, many years later, then I had to kind of look again and saying, somebody asked me, and for the book as well, so when did you go on medication? I said, I don't know anymore. He said, well, let me see, maybe I still got the pills. I save things. That's part of my Adderall as well, or my ADHD as well. So I found the tube that still had 97 pills in it, and it said January 2008. But the point that I wanted to make, in my case, I don't use anything. But I know a lot of other people that do, and it works well for them. Same as you already indicated in your case. Other ones, Ritalin, and some other ones. But for me, this works well for me the way it is for me right now. And and the point obviously is that everybody is not exactly the same, but we have a lot of the same features and some of the same experiences in different ways as you and me have. And that's why this discussion is so interesting, because that showing or showcasing to the public in general that the path for some people, male, female, or different individuals that had different experience is different. But one of the areas that I believe I would like you to comment on is that I drift away easily if I'm not interested. I need to find something that if I'm interested, I'm very good. Better than average, usually. I remember things extremely well. Most people that are around me will know that for me, that I have an amazing memory, and and I always say it was grade 7, so in the things that I do, and the same with the numbers, I'm good at that as well. Why my own analysis is because if I'm interested, I create that passion, then I'm very good at it. If I'm not interested, I'm in a different world. As you said, I can listen to somebody for an hour and I haven't got a clue as to what they talked about, because I'm in a different world. So, but if I'm passionate, hence I wrote this one here, finding your passion, living the dream, is not only about that or ADHD. It is simply saying the younger you are in life, to kind of have a general direction, where do you want to go, that makes your life easier as you go forward. It sounds to me, in your case, because the medical direction, psychology, and a number of other things, possibly because of your mom's influence and others, drove you into a direction that you like and still are doing today. Other people, though, I've encountered many times saying, that here I, hypothetically speaking, I'm 45 years old, I hate my job. And say, well, why don't you change? Well, I got a mortgage and I got this, that, and the other. I said, wrong, because it will affect adversely your life and all the things around you. Find something that you like, and so hence the book, Finding Your Passion, Living the Dream. And if you ask me and saying, okay, John, are you living the dream? I am. And and I have been since I was young, because I knew what I wanted. I wanted to go to Canada. I wanted to build the lumber mill, and although things have gone up and down, and all the challenges, but looking back, saying, yeah, I lived the dream, and I'm living the dream. And even still today, I'm still writing books. I'm very active physically in the gym. I tried to stay in shape. I competed bodybuilding and physique. I think when I was 70, I competed. Here regionally, I became second on bodybuilding, third in physique, qualified me for the provincials here, came in third in physique, second in bodybuilding, qualified me for the nationals and for the Arnolds of all places. And then obviously COVID came, and right now I'm training again, because in '84 Or when I'm 84 in 2024, I'm going to go again compete on the national level, and then I've had some communication with Arnold Schwarzenegger, and he wants to meet me in Ohio when I again compete for, the on the Arnolds, and so it motivates me. I love to go to the gym. I know that being physically and mentally and in good condition creates quality of life, and obviously it's not so much age but quality of life that is the key. And so the point that I'm making is that once I find something and I develop the passion for it, then I'm very good at it. And then at the same time, I'm well aware of the fact that ADHD makes me a little bit different. And that's why I always say to everybody that you cannot avoid interacting with ADHD. If it is not in your family, your circle of friends, the more you know about it, the more interesting it is, because a lot of these people are very successful, and you are, not giving you a number, but is 140 that we are doing today, guys? The podcast, huh? 139. So we have done 139 podcasts, and usually what I do with my podcasting, I find interesting persons, not about one thing or the other, but just persons that have been interesting for whatever reason in their field. And the amazing things, Olivia, is that amazingly frequently, I have people sitting, I usually sit on that side when we do it in person. I encounter people that said, I've not said this before to anybody, but I have ADHD. Really? Happens frequently. And in fact, we did 3 podcasts one time, and I think 2 of the guests, I had no idea. Ladies, in fact, both of them ADHD. And
Wow.
and so, and so the point that I'm making makes sense to me in a way, is that a lot of the individuals that have been successful love life for whatever reasons, are very good in whatever field they chose, is one of the things that the frequency of occurrence in that population is probably much higher than 20%, which I believe is the general population of male and females.
Yeah, and it's interesting when you bring up the whole like career thing and the passion and being interested, because there was a point before I hit my burnout, like years before that, where even though I love helping people right now, I was in that profession, I hated what I was doing. And I just felt this really unfulfilled, like this isn't what I'm supposed to do for the rest of my life. Like I kind of knew early on, but I kept doing it, because I had to pay the bills. Like I went to college for that. So I was definitely in that mentality of like, oh, you went to school for this, you have to continue down the path. And, I think this is good for people to understand too, is like maybe there is a passion, right? Like a generalized passion. And maybe what you're doing with it in that moment, if you're feeling like stuck or unfulfilled, maybe it's just supposed to look different than that. So, like, I think that working in a school system, I think the structure of it, all of the things involved was not conducive for the way that my brain functions. And I really felt like when I left that was when I started to really find what
Yeah.
within that, like helping people or whatever you want to call it, like psychology field happened. And my ADHD diagnosis kind of skyrocketed that. But I remember when I quit my job, I was in that particular school for 7 years. And I told my boss, and I remember on the phone, he was sad to see you go. Like, you're one of my favorite school psychologists in the district. He's like, but I also have known you for a few years now, and I know that you're meant to not be inside this box.
Correct.
I know that, and I didn't have my ADHD diagnosis at this point. He's like, I know that you're meant to do something more.
Right.
And I had no idea that I was going to be in this place where I am now. And, I still think I'm like earlier on in my own, what this is going to continue to look like for me. But I think it's that flexibility of like, I know I'm passionate about this. I know that this fulfills me and I can do so many different things with it. And I think my ADHD brain loves that.
Yeah. I think so too. And as you already know from me and my background, and so where I really did I did all the other things and building companies and doing all of those things was quite successful. But then I changed my life totally, when I was 70 years old and started, going to the gym. And then I take everything that I do, if I like it, very serious, and I give it all that I got. It's where at one day I was already in the gym for about 8 years, worked with a trainer because I must have an appointment. My whole life is appointments. When I have an appointment, I will go. If I go to, especially going to the gym, I can find 100 reasons as why I shouldn't go. and and so when I have an appointment, then I have to go. And so I was about 7 or 8 years in the gym, and then somebody said, "Hey, John, have you ever thought about competing?" And I said, "Me? Yeah." And I said, interesting. And so it gave me a goal, and then from there on in, obviously, I gave it all that I got and was quite successful in it. And then the writing of the books, against all odds, was about 5, 6 years ago. But I had already, I say, it took me 80 years to live it, 20 years to think about it, 2 years to write it. And then writing books is not easy. I'm not telling you anything you don't know, obviously, but to the general public, and then autobiography, and especially if you have grade 3 and grade 7, and your mother tongue is a dialect, and you had to acquire Dutch, and then your whole world changed when you were 24. You had to learn to speak English, and then to write a book about it, So, but just being funny in a way, but I could not have done that, Olivia. There is no question in my mind, unless I had ADHD. That allowed me to become all of that and know I can do it. Like today, not bragging about it, but I run quite a number of companies. A lot of people say to me, I'm going to be 83 in November, and I usually get up at 5:30 in the morning. I always think I'm late. I always make my bed, and then I'm always in the hurry, and I can run circles around a lot of people and say, "How do you do it?" Well, I say ADHD. So, and I write books. Never wrote a book in my life. This one, the biography. You cannot say, I wrote the first book. I don't like it, so I'm going to write it. No, there's only one. You cannot write two. And then I said, okay, I have to write one about this one, ADHD Unlocked, and very successful. And then I said, I want to write one about finding your passion, living the dream. So I did that. It's coming out officially on the 19th. I know it will be very successful. And then I'm working on two more. The one is Living Young, Dying Old. Living young means being older. It's not about the number. It's about quality of life. And how do you go about it without making it overly complicated? Once you read these, we'll send you these three, and then you have to give me your comments about it and see what you think. I try to keep it uncomplexed and making it easier to understand. But the other part about it is that I'm enjoying ADHD. I'm already far past the point now that for probably in my life till the time I was 60 or 57, nearly 55 years, where I became aware, failed my grade 3 when I was probably 7 years or 8 years old. For nearly 50 years, I kind of felt deep down that I'm as good as anybody else, but still externally I felt like I had been a failure. I went to Canada because it's the land of my heroes, but the other one is that I felt at 24, I need to know if I can do the things that I believe I can do, and in order to do that, I had to start from nothing. Get the ticket, go there, don't speak the language, don't know a soul, don't have a job. And at 25:47, when I came off the bus, 25:47, that's what I had. And then it took me then until I was 57 and saw the book Driven to Distraction at the bookstore, and then from there on in, started and probably the Toastmasters. I want you to look it up, and because I believe I say to the people that I interact with, on ADHD or others, is that Toastmasters has helped me in by pure coincidence, because I'm ADHD. My mind goes 100 miles a minute, and I must slow it down. So otherwise, I cannot have an articulate conversation. We'll be all over the map, So I had to become a good listener. And so what I got out of Toastmasters is confidence, but also becoming a good listener. And then now I'm a very good speaker. I can give a presentation for an hour. I don't need any notes because I can make it just automatically because I have the confidence. The issues and the discussion will come to me, and as I speak, and so all of that is partially circumstantial. The other part of being ADHD, I call it, and I'm convinced, is the superpower.
The one thing that stood out to me that you mentioned that kind of like popped into my brain when you were talking is the whole like feeling like a failure or not, like you're not good at something, and like that imposter syndrome that many of us tend to feel, even if we are good, like even if like we're getting good feedback, whatever, we're really skilled at something, we still believe internally, right, that we're terrible.
Correct.
I truly feel that the best thing for people with ADHD to do is to experience failure. I really think it builds, like it almost desensitizes us to that like internal like shame spiral that can happen. And you start to build that confidence of, well, I've already like failed and fallen before, and I've gotten back up, and I've done this and I've done that. And I feel like that's so powerful for us.
I agree with you 100%. This book is precisely about that. I wrote it about the bad, the good, and the ugly when things go off the track. And and that's why I wrote this book. I want to send it to you, and that is precisely to the issue that you said. And now the other thing that this is free to you, obviously. But what do you think the price of my books are?
That's a good question. I don't know, maybe like 20 US.
$25.47.
Oh,
This one.
Smart. Okay, I got it.
All my books are $25.47. So comical, eh?
Yeah, that's clever. I like that.
Any other things that come to mind, Olivia? We have covered a lot of ground. I like to stay in touch with you.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then maybe every number of months or so to have an interaction with you, is saying, how is your life going? How is mine going? What are you doing? Where are you going? And then obviously our podcasting, this one will be on all the major media in 24 hours.
Okay.
So we and they are all pretty much the way. We don't redact them or change them. They are as we are now. I do about 3 a week, 12 to 15 a month. We little bit bragging myself, maybe to a certain extent. I'm probably the largest podcaster in Western Canada, if not in Canada. We had on all our major media, January, February, March, an average of 5 million views a month. So they go all over the place. Some of them a little bit more, some of them a little less. But so we are listened to by a lot of people, and obviously ADHD is special to me, but it's not the only area. But I will be more active and interacting with people like yourself. I really enjoy it, and it's a privilege. So I want to stay in touch with you as we go forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for having me today. This has been really great. And it's just great to hear the similarities, but also the differences and how everyone's experience, even though we might have similar things, can still have its differences, you know?
Yeah, but by and large, we are very, very similar. That there is, I believe, at least that I look at ADHD as a superpower. I could not have done what I'm doing without it, and to have it being recognized more and moving out of the stigma or the looking at it as a deficiency or a liability. I don't believe that is the case, and I will be speaking on that wherever the opportunity presents itself. And then the other part is we're going to send you the books. Scott, maybe you can send Scott, or maybe already has your address, and then we'll send them out today.
Okay. Yeah, I don't remember. But Scott can email me.
Okay. Olivia, it was my pleasure, and thank you for being on my podcast.
Yes, thank you for having me.
Take care.
Okay, bye.
Bye.